I'd like now to invite the moderator, Amelia Lindsay, who is the Group Director, Advisory and Chief Planner for Beca, to kick off our first panel session. Please welcome to the stage Amelia and her panellists, Fahad Shehzad, Natalia Fareti, who's going to be joining us virtually from Hawaii, and Atarangi Thompson.
Kia ora. So I'll start, hopefully that's going to kick in, yes. I'll start talking and just give a bit of context to the discussion. Most of the session is going to be about hearing from the panellists themselves, but I just wanted to sort of introduce what I'm hoping that we will get out of today's session and then provide them an opportunity to talk. And I get to give them a bit of a Skype sheet as I go, which I said we were going to put on the screen, but I'm going to have to read it out, and so you'll just have to sit there uncomfortably and listen to me talk about your... Look, this morning's session for the conference is about uniting and the power of purpose, and I think we've heard some really great presentations on that, and this is an opportunity for us to explore with some really challenging and exciting leadership in New Zealand that we are seeing, thinking about how they're addressing some of those social, economic and environmental changes that we're looking at. And I think for many of us, for me personally as an employer, I think it's a really important and exciting opportunity for us to think about how we're creating an environment for the future and our future leaders that will give and enable them to deliver to their purpose. So that was a bit of the scene setting that I wanted to do. What I'm going to do is run through a few questions. I really encourage you to put some questions to our panellists as we're going through. I'm going to introduce each of the panellists, and then I've got a few pre-prepared questions. Gives you some time for food for thought to put your questions up, and hopefully we'll have a bit of time at the end to run through those. What I'm going to do is introduce the presenters in person first, and then I'll come to Natalia, and just so she knows, she is well and truly larger than life on our screen. So we're not neglecting you, it's just you have a big presence already in the room. So, kia ora, Atarangi. I just want to give a bit of a background to you. You finished year 13 at Pukekohe High School, which provides a bit of a link for you and I, because I'm a Pukekohe girl myself, and my kids have just finished just finished high school, or one still finishing high school this year at Pukekohe, so interested to see how you've transitioned from Pukekohe High School into the work that you're doing now. You're in the environmental space, and probably the most directly connected to some of the infrastructure work that we're doing compared to our panellists. You were a recipient of the Progressive Employment Program run by the City Rail Link, and since then have become part of the Downer team with that same project. You're doing a full-time role at Downer, as I understand it, and you're doing part-time study. And really, really interested in talking to you and hearing from you about the change in program that you're seeing and the work that you can do in that space. The second panellist is Fahad, and please do correct me if I get your name pronunciation wrong, just gently put me right. Fahad Shehzad, thank you. Dynamic leader and passionate advocate for social justice, and you've done some awesome leadership, particularly after the very tragic events in 2019 in the Christchurch mosque attacks. You were recognised by the Prime Minister for that work, but I think it was about ensuring the safety and well-being, and so pertinent to the conversation that we heard earlier this morning about the well-being of your community and how you responded to that. So I'd be really interested in that social dimension, about thinking about how you responded to that and the purpose that was driving you. So, kia ora. And then Natalie Fareti, on the stage. You're currently working in strategy and policy, and really with perhaps a bit more of an economic lens. That's not the only role you have, and I know while you are at Toitū Te Whenua now, you also have a number of leadership roles in co-chairing the Wellington City Council's South Pacific Advisory Group and the boards of the Wellington Pacifica Business Network and the Greater Wellington and Government Economics Network Youth Representative. So I think, some really amazing roles that you're taking in leadership about that economic well-being and bringing that dimension. So I think we've got a panel here who can talk to a number of those critical aspects of sustainability, about the purpose of what that sustainability is trying to deliver with those different lenses and perspectives. So now I've given you the embarrassing bit of who you're talking to and why they're here. Now I would like just to work through some questions. And maybe I will start with you, Natalia. What is the one thing you have done so far that you're really proud of that's helped you contribute to your sustainable purpose? And so just thinking about the roles that you're taking, not necessarily the job that you're in now, but what motivates you and what is driving, I suppose, some of that sustainable purpose for you?
Kia ora, and thank you for the question. And kia ora, tālofa and aloha from Hawaii. I'm joining you from Honolulu here. What drives me is a sense of community. Everything I do is around community and serving others. So if I was to define my purpose, it's about learning as much as I can so that I can better serve. And I guess it wasn't always deliberate, but I found myself in roles where I was able to live that out, whether it be directly or indirectly, leaving, I wouldn't say it was a legacy because I'm not all about being visible, but leaving footsteps or planting a seed so that others can find it a little bit easier every step that you help pave the way. I always like to say, try and be a good ancestor. And so the roles that I find myself stepping into are those that are not necessarily visible from the front, is what may be seen as normal leadership, where you have to be loud, brash, very visible. I'm more of a servant leader practitioner myself, but knowing that I have an impact that'll last after I've gone is what I look for in different roles.
Kia ora. I really like that concept of that legacy that you're building sort of invisibly, which is a lot of, from an infrastructure perspective, a lot of what we do. We create places sort of invisibly. They work best, I think as Minister Woods just said, they work best when we don't see them in a way, and they create the society and the communities that we're talking to. And in your comment and your response there really resonated with that leadership that does that same thing in different spaces. And Fahaz, how about you? What's something you're really proud of in terms of the impact that you've been able to have so far?
Yeah.
Long way to go.
Yeah. No, first of all, I just want to say kia ora. Thank you very much to Ainsley and ISC for having me here. I'm really excited to be sharing a bit of my insight with you guys. In response to your question, I would kind of frame my sustainability purpose as trying to eliminate barriers for minorities in New Zealand. Being of a minority background myself, I know how hard it is to navigate your way through the systems and all that kind of thing. So really trying to spread that cultural competency, really trying to make it an easier place for minorities. So with that in mind, in terms of what's the proudest achievement for me in that aspect, it would definitely have to be the work in 2019 in regards to the terrorist attacks. What I kind of did was, it was just an instinctual kind of thing where I realized that because a lot of people are not feeling safe right now, I wanted to use my platform to ensure that everyone around me, regardless of whether they were minorities or not, felt that they were actually safe and that they had a sense of belonging. So that was definitely the proudest thing in my thing, being able to do that and actually achieve that to some extent. And the thing that I took away from that, that actually is quite encouraging, is the fact that leadership comes in different forms. I realize that now leadership is evolving and you don't need to be that man in that gray suit towards the end of his career to be a leader. It can come in all shapes and forms. And as long as you have a genuine purpose, you have a genuine drive to do good, you can make a difference as a leader. So that's definitely the proudest thing for me.
Excellent, thank you. I really like that comment. I'm going to come back to it in terms of what gave you, so just a bit of food for thought, what gave you the bravery to do that, or what might not give you the bravery to do that. And I think that's something for us as employers and as work colleagues and things, really useful for us to think about how we're creating that environment. Atarangi, you're up. And so really, as I say, you've come from the infrastructure world, and I just want to think about, how is it aligning with your purpose, and how have you found the opportunities that you've had really giving you an opportunity to live that purpose?
I mean, I guess I kind of really related to what Natalia said about being for the community. So obviously in the infrastructure you have all these different teams, but then also bringing in new people is kind of what I kind of focused on. So being part of that PEP program, being part of the pilot, and being able to kind of pave the way for more students and more people to kind of experience what I experienced and see if they, I don't know, like being in the infrastructure, and just give them a pathway when maybe they didn't have any idea of what they wanted to do before. Yeah, that's something that I was real proud to be a part of.
Yeah, excellent. And are you finding that that is, are you becoming a Pukekohe recruitment branch? Because, you know, I'm always keen on looking for context, but you know, also, how do you go about attracting people into that area, or do you just make the space and let them do it for themselves? What's your philosophy on that?
I guess kind of just making the space for them. Yeah. Like there's students I found, they're always really curious about things. So they don't really have to have like their own thing. They can even just shadow you and just watching what you're doing and asking like all these different questions and stuff. I think that like we're able to make the space for them, so I think that we just should. Yeah. And
so maybe if you were thinking about that impact that you've been able to have as a leader, and you've been thinking about how you've been able to drive some change, what surprised you getting into this that was easier than you thought it might be? You know, what made it easy? If anything,
I don't know. I don't know if I'd say that this was quite easy.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I'm not very used to public speaking and things like this, but I guess like just being able to share my stories with them and like being able to make those relationships and connections with people, like it's, I don't know, it just helps. Like it helps me to like, I don't know, push myself to be a leader, and then it also helps others to see like, I don't know, what can come out of doing all this work for people when, I don't know, it might not be like so easy to start, I guess.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Atarangi. And Fahad, how about for you? When you made that decision and grabbed that moment and saw that sort of gap and stepped in, as you said, from a leadership perspective, what made it work for you? What was something that you could share with the people in the audience that made it that surprised you about the fact that you could be as effective as you were?
Yeah. So just to give a bit of context as to the kind of work that I did in that role, obviously in trying to ensure that everyone felt comfortable and safe, I organised for free counselling support to everyone in the community and within my high school. There was banners and card signing events, and there was fundraising going on. We managed to raise over $3,000 in just a couple of days. So that kind of thing was going on. And so what I realized was actually the easiest thing, that was quite a shock to me actually, was that how willing people are to help. When I was planning to undertake that whole thing and actually try to do things, I was a little bit nervous because I thought maybe I had to bear all the burden myself and just try to, pull all the strings and do everything myself. But then I realized that as soon as you actually take that step of wanting to make a difference for a good cause, people are willing to help. Everyone wants to help and help you in any way they can. So in terms of just getting our message out there, in terms of, getting those counselors in to help, our students in our community, everyone was willing to help. It didn't take any time at all to try to get everyone on board. So that was probably the easiest thing, and it was quite a surprise, and it was, a pleasant surprise, to say the least.
Excellent, thank you. And Natalia, anything from you to add, or thinking about, what's been easy? What surprised you in terms of being able to be as effective as you've been in some of your leadership roles?
I wouldn't say it's been easy. Everything is always a continual lesson, but just to talk what has been said already, I think one of the things that was surprising for me, learning to get more used to it, was always expecting people's good intentions. Because sometimes if you were to walk into a situation feeling all combative and defensive, it's only tiring for yourself, right? But as Fahad just said, the support of others around you, when you do step into a leadership role, and having the support of others around you makes things much easier, because you're together as a team, and if people are not willing to support, that makes it really hard. So people's good intentions and learning to be able to delegate once people are around you has really made a big difference.
Kia ora, thank you. I think that's a common theme from all of you about being maybe trusted, but also trusting and having some faith in other people that they're going to be supportive, and that positive reaction you're going to get to the idea probably the scariest, or no, maybe one of the scariest, but is putting the idea up and then seeing that goodwill come back. Now, maybe on the negative side, because it's always useful and sometimes easier for some of us to think about what's a bit tough. And as you're working through now in different roles, and this isn't about a particular job or anything, but is there anything that you're finding harder or anything that's holding you back from keeping that leadership work? And a number of you have said there is a lot of mahi in this still, but maybe it's just, is there anything that you could share with the audience about things that sort of seem an unreasonable frustration or making it a bit difficult? Natalia, I'll start with you.
Kia ora. That one's, yeah, very tricky one. I think for me, it is others stepping back or stepping to the side so that others can step forward. And various things that I've been involved in over the years, sometimes you'll get the stalwarts who may have an encyclopedia of knowledge, but don't necessarily recognize when the time is right to allow others to step forward. And it doesn't mean they have to take a back seat, but to allow other voices at the table, because it does get tiring trying to fight to get a seat at the table. And then when you're at the table and not even having a chance to speak, that can be a frustration. Other things I found are having to intellectualize information. So that it's a method of communication, right? So you've got to tailor to your audience. But oftentimes I found that because telling a story, a narrative doesn't necessarily resonate with particular audiences. So you have to intellectualize the information in a way that they can understand, give them all the graphs and the figures, and then you see them have that aha moment. And then they kind of arrive at that narrative that I would typically start with, but I have to intellectualize information first for them to understand. Because when you're talking about bringing people on a journey with you, you have to tailor your communication styles so that people can understand, probably at different paces and in different methods, but learning that, there are different styles and I have to adapt myself as well.
I think that's there's a great personal lesson for me. I'm definitely a talker while I think, and just thinking about the air that I might be taking up from someone else being able to do that, I think that's a really good observation that you've shared with us. And I really like the storytelling one. It's absolutely, as we try and when we're thinking about sustainability and the challenge of trying to bring all of those different perspectives in. I often say, the biggest challenge in sustainability is about the collaboration force that we need to bring. And that makes storytelling so much more important because we're dealing with so many different players and trying to bring in all of those perspectives and ideas. So I think that's an excellent observation. Thank you, Natalia. Faha, do you have anything that you'd like to share in terms of the university world and the change there? It's a great bureaucratic organisation. I get to say that, you don't, I know. So anything you'd have, anything you're seeing that's perhaps harder or being a bit of a resistant force for you?
Yeah, so currently I'm occupying a role as the president of the University of Auckland South Asian Law Students Association. So our kind of collective purpose there is to try and iron out any issues or barriers that South Asian students might face in entering the legal workforce. So with that being said, I feel like the biggest challenge that has arisen recently is just laziness. It's that newfound comfort that we found of just staying at home during the COVID time, sitting behind the screen, working from home, suit on top, PJs on the bottom, that whole thing. So because of that, it's a little difficult to try and motivate the team, motivate the members who are part of our club to actually attend in-person events, actually do their part in their roles to achieve that collective purpose. That's the hardest thing. And many of you who are out there who are employers, you'd actually know this, or just leaders in your workplace, you'd know that there's only so much you can do as a leader to motivate your team. Because motivation is intrinsic. It's self, it's a self kind of thing that you have for yourself. So yeah, that's kind of a difficult thing for me because as a leader, sometimes I kind of do have that feeling where I want to micromanage, but then motivation is something you just can't control. So just, really getting that motivation out of your team, that's probably the hardest thing.
Wow, okay, that's a really interesting, and perhaps not quite what I was expecting, thinking about you trying to bring change into the university, but just that really good observation of bringing the change to yourself first, and bringing and encouraging the people you're working with, the community you're working with and for to bring the change themselves. So
Absolutely.
thank you. Yeah, kia ora. Atarangi, anything from you that is harder than you thought it might be?
So obviously I work on a construction project, and there's always kind of like this flow of people coming in and out. So then just trying to keep that same standard of environmental and sustainability, it is quite difficult because you don't want to micromanage, like you said, you don't want to micromanage the people, but you do want them to just take notice of these things and try and keep it in their mind. So yeah, I guess just trying to keep that going is quite hard at times.
I think when you're working on such a big project and such a monumental change to our city, and it's got so many programs going in it, many of them just fantastic examples of that transformation in terms of the recruitment programs, in terms of the environmental and recycling outcomes and all of those things. How do you keep the story in your mind about that sort of bigger picture of the outcomes that you're delivering with your teams in terms of the role that you're doing? Because as you say, sometimes there can be the hard work and the mahi of just convincing someone right there on the ground, right at that moment, in terms of that bigger picture. Perhaps goes a little bit to Natalia's storytelling. Do you have any thoughts on that in terms of how you approach that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess while also doing my university studies, I've been learning more about like the environmental space. And I don't know, it's kind of developed into this kind of passion for it, I guess. And then just keeping that in my mind, it's just like, you know, like where's all of this going to be like in the next 100 years? Like, are we making it better or are we making it worse? And obviously we want to make it better. So yeah, just trying to keep that in mind while we're doing things. Yeah. That's probably
Yeah, just while you're making the decisions, perhaps. Yeah. And you've been through the ISK training program as well. How is that complementing with the research and the work that you're doing currently?
I did that when I first joined the program, so I'm not entirely sure that I understood all of it at the time.
Right.
But as I've kind of been in my job and learning more about the sustainability side, it has like made more sense, especially like having like all these different kind of goals. I feel like it makes it easier to like pinpoint like, oh, maybe we can get here, and then from there it's like, oh, so what can we do to push it more? And just continuing on like that makes it a bit more manageable, I guess, in my mind.
That's a somewhat selfish question from me as a board member for the Sustainability Council, but I think that practical example that you're talking to in terms of being able to understand some of the theory when you get the opportunity to do that practical application, it's worthy, worthy of a file note for us, so thank you. And Fahad, you stood up and took a role in leader in response to something you saw needing to be done. Did that, were you, at what moment did you realise it was going to need to be you? I know that's a really difficult question to think about, but in terms of, and you made a comment about how people got behind you, but sort of what was the light bulb moment, perhaps, if you had one, that you could share about what sort of sparked you stepping into that?
Yeah, honestly speaking, as I mentioned before, it was purely instinctual. This was one of those experiences as a leader for me where I didn't actually have to think consciously about, having to lead. It was just something that I saw and I felt that needed to be done. And so I just, it was kind of just instinctual where I felt like, okay, we need to do something about this. What kind of motivated me, to go ahead and do it was, in regards to the whole Christchurch attacks, being a Muslim myself, I was worrying about my safety at the time, and I was thinking about the community as well and thinking, okay, so how are we now going to be perceived in society? So I was worried about my safety, and I knew that many other people would have the same concern. But I was more so worried for my sister and my mother because as Muslim women, they wear the hijab, so it's more easily identifiable. And so I was more worried about their safety. And so I realized that going to a school with over 2,000 pupils, being in a community like Mount Roskill where there's so much diversity, many other people would share that concern. So for me, it was just trying to ensure that when people would drop off their siblings or their kids to work or to high school, they wouldn't have that fear of their kids' safety. That was the biggest thing for me. I wanted to make sure that they had the peace of mind that they would feel safe and comfortable wherever they're being dropped off. And so yeah, from there, one thing led to another, and so obviously everything happened as it did. But that was kind of the motivation and what made me actually want to do it.
Excellent, thank you. So just that sort of the bravery of realising that other people would have the same concerns or bigger concerns.
Absolutely,
Yeah, okay, no, that's lovely, thank you. And Natalia, for you, I see now you've moved into a more policy development space, and just thinking about that long game that you're working in now, wondered if you could share anything about how you're keeping that motivation as a leader in that. And I may be stepping on the comments you've already made about storytelling, but if you had anything you could add in terms of, that policy work can sometimes be frustrating in that you can't immediately see the impact that it's having. So just how you're keeping motivated about that, and again, how we might be able to think about that in terms of some of the work that we're doing with our people.
Thanks. It's the little things, like I never expected to end up working for central government. I was in business in the food industry. I worked as an economist in the private sector. I had to be convinced to join central government because my perception at the time, several years ago, was, oh, those people, they have meetings about meetings, they have 2-hour lunches and they waste taxpayers' money. So when I was finally convinced to join government, that was actually MB at the time, I figured, well, if I don't like it, I can always go back to the private sector. But surprisingly, I enjoyed it more than I expected to, and here I am. So I went from MB to the Reserve Bank to Toitū to Whenua, and I found myself in strategy and policy roles because I was thinking about how much impact can I realistically as an individual have. When you talk about change, you start with yourself, but I was thinking, and as an economist, I'm trying to maximize the utility or maximize the impact that I can have as a singular person. And I found that strategy and policy is where I can influence at a systems level. And I also believe in prevention is better than cure. So I wanted to be able to influence kind of early on. It is a long-term game. It is more about mindset, but I'd rather be in this space than just not just because I don't want to discredit the great work of people, but rather than being the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, how can I ensure, or at least plant seeds so that we've got an ongoing mindset change over time? So as I said at the beginning, if I can only be planting seeds, I may never sit under the tree of the seed that I plant, but knowing that it will be there for others to enjoy down the road is what keeps me motivated as well. For instance, my current workplace, Toitū Te Whenua, the whakatauki is whatu ngaro ngaro te tangata, Toitū Te Whenua. And in English, that means people come and go, but the land remains. And that is a great summary of sustainability in the whakatauki, or the proverb that I really enjoy. And that's one of the great reasons that drew me to work at Toitū Te Whenua. So it can be hard at times, especially when you find struggles and when you come across people who may not necessarily be of a similar mindset, or they're in their way, but perhaps further back, is to not to take things personal. Know that it is a journey and that you plant your seeds far and wide, and hopefully you may have an orchard or a grove or a forest sometime down the track.
Kia ora, thank you. I've got one last question that I've got for you as a panel, and then I've got one question from the floor. And again, I thought, Natalia, I'd start with you. And it's really probably the most self-serving way I've put the question, but I know at the moment talent and retention and bringing sustainability people into our workforce is really critical. And I just thought it would be of value to the audience for us to think about, from your views, what do you see as something that employers, as us as employers or us as colleagues, could do to make workplaces more attractive to you as people with a long path in leadership and hopefully in all our industries. So if I can start with you, Natalia, and I'll just bounce back this way, coming through.
Cool. Having a clear sense of purpose as an organisation, I think, is quite critical. If you don't have one beyond making money, I think you'll struggle, because there are lots of options out there and people can be quite mobile. In saying that, people, when they find a place where they feel well connected, where their values align with the purpose of the organisation, they will stay, they will be loyal. I mean, look at It's kind of like if you've seen that TEDx talk by Simon Sinek about the iPhone and why it's been so successful. They started with the why rather than talking about the features of their product itself. And it's similar like that, I feel, for organizations. If you're wanting to attract great talent and to retain them, is to have that sense of purpose. Second, culture really is critical. I have several good friends who have left workplaces. They were getting great pay. The work was technically, diverse, but they didn't have that sense of culture, and it was leading to things like burnouts. And so they deliberately left. Talk to people, delve beneath the surface, understand why. And then I'd like to see changes in HR practices in terms of how interviews are conducted. Even a simple thing as sitting in a circle, the types of questions you ask and the way you ask them. Even a simple thing as spending more time on an introduction at the beginning, because when people are more comfortable, you will get a better quality answer, and they will probably reveal more than they probably would have otherwise because they're still nervous. I mean, interviews are not a natural state to be in for anybody. Tell me about a time. I can't remember. I'm stressed out. And also dig more behind what's on the piece of paper on the CV. People often may not consider things that are very relevant to a job to put on their CV. Like, for instance, I'm a youth choir leader in my church. I volunteer for this and that. Actually, those are really great management practices that have already been in use, but because they don't consider that to be something formal enough to put on a CV, both parties miss out. So really delve beneath the surface and go beyond the stock standard interview questions. Thanks.
Great, fulsome answer there. Thank you, Natalia, and some good food for thought. And you'll have to get some feedback from you on my interviewing of you as well as we're going through this, just to think about it. Fahad, anything from you?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is, as well as talking the talk, you got to walk the walk. So essentially leading by example. For example, think of an example. As parents, you tell your kids that the worst thing in the world is swearing. And it's the worst thing in the world until you come across a stupid driver and you're flipping them off with your kid in the back, right? So, obviously with that kind of thing, ensuring that you're leading by example, because change, in my eyes, does come from the top bottom. Your team needs someone to look up to as inspiration, and that's why leaders are there. So ensuring that you actually you're actually practicing what you preach is the most important thing to me. And, personally, as a law student, I'm currently on the lookout for internships at law firms. And funnily enough, everyone says that diversity and inclusion is their key priority. And so, that's really awesome for me, and I really like to hear that. But then when you look through their list of partners, that diversity is not there. So that's quite an unattractive thing for me as someone who's applying for, an internship. Essentially just making sure that if you're saying something, you practice what you preach, and you don't just say it as lip service. That's probably the most important thing for me when I'm looking for work.
Kia ora, Fahad. That's a great point. I suppose to give a little bit of pain, from that, those processes can be quite slow in organisations. Is there anything else you'd look for to satisfy yourself you were seeing that change, so you might not see it in the partners? Or do you think it just needs to be at that leadership level outright? How would you tackle that?
I feel like you need to start from the bottom up. Obviously, you've got to start at the grassroots level, and so just ensuring that you actually are employing more people with diverse backgrounds and different walks of life is the start. But in terms of leadership, I think that's an area where you also do need that diversity. You can't just have it on the low level, because if you really do want to drive change, it's got to be at the high level. And if you have people from diverse backgrounds at that level, that's where you're really going to get that push. So I think while it starts from the grassroots level, it does need to be at that partners level as well, yes.
Kia ora. Thanks, Fahad. And Ātarangi, anything from you to add to that in terms of things from an employer's perspective, looking out at this audience in a workplace, and people are bringing people on? Is there anything that we could take away, words of wisdom from you in terms of what would make it, what makes it exciting, what you are enticed by and interested in?
I guess what I would be interested in is like community engagement as well. I guess sustainability is about the future. So then also connecting with the communities, and then maybe also developing that talent that you're looking for instead. I think that's probably what could be happening. Now, obviously, I came from a different background. I didn't have my degrees or anything like that. And I know a lot of people actually that I think if they knew of the opportunities, then they would have definitely jumped for it. But I think it just needs to be made available to them. Yeah.
Cool. That's a
Can I add
really
a couple more points?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm just being sparked by the other two.
You can
Another
ask
thing.
a couple more in 30 seconds. Sorry.
Cool. Is please emphasize continuous improvement and professional development, because that is a big draw card, if not a bigger salary, chances to learn. And I'd also challenge our senior leaders is to check your middle. When I say middle, I mean frozen middle, because that's often where change falters. It's like your CEO, the tier 1 and 2s get it, and people on the ground get it. It's usually those in the middle who actually have the most impact influencing their teams. If they don't put into practice, like Fahad was saying, these D&I and any other type of policy, then that's where things tend to slow down or freeze.
So, a quick fire question, because I've got one here. What was the best thing, and I'm going to just open the floor, what was the best thing someone else did to support you on your journey so far? The one thing. Anyone?
Oh, myself, sorry. Stepping back and allowing me to step forward.
Fahad, anything from you?
I think it just goes back to that first point that I mentioned about just supporting me and making sure that I had the support from all levels whenever I needed it.
Kia ora. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely the support of others really helped me to be where I am today.
Cool. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for taking the time to share some of the learnings that you've had, and also the amazing leadership opportunities that you've already, each of you, driven. It gives such inspiration, I think, for that purpose and that sustainability outcome. And as I say, recognising the cultural, the social and the economic and environmental dimensions of what we need to drive to get those sustainable outcomes. So thank you very much, and if the audience could join me in acknowledging the contributions you've made.